Welcome, everybody. It's podcast time. In this podcast, I get together with somebody who loves games so much they might as well marry them. For my first guest, I have my very own chosen life partner, I don't know what, my girlfriend, Samantha. Hi, Samantha. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. This is my first recording of this, so Sam is actually over there in another room with the door closed.
I am.
All right. So the concept of the podcast is you're going to pick 5 games that you love so much. You're going to do something old, something new, something borrowed, something borrowed, something blue, and then the final category is one that we'll roll out when we get there. So why don't we start with the first of your 5 games, Sam? Something old.
Something old. This one wasn't a hard one for me to come up with, and it's got to be Spyro.
Spyro. Okay. Spyro the Dragon. The original.
Specifically Spyro Gateway to Glimmer, which was actually the second one that came out. That is
Right.
the first one I played, and actually I haven't played the original one, but I played Gateway to Glimmer so much. It's like one of the few games I've 100% completed,
Right.
and did without the internet, which feels
Oh,
mind-boggling now.
so how old were you then when you played that?
Um, well, I played it first at my friend's house. We didn't have a PlayStation. We had a Super Nintendo that my cousin had kindly donated us when he upgraded to a better system, and that was our first game system. But I only have had 4 games on it, some of the old Mario games. And then we got a PlayStation. We got a PlayStation when the PS2 came out. I remember because when the PS2 came out, the PlayStation price shot down. So we got a PlayStation, and the first
Yes.
game I
The
got.
for anyone listening in another country, in Great Britain, there was a tendency among the working classes who weren't that poor to get a generation behind. Um, we did the same in my family, and when I started buying my own, I kind of kept that up, kept buying a generation behind. I think now is the first time I'm on current console generations.
Yeah, I remember getting. We did get a we did get a PS2 before the PS3 came out, but yeah, I remember when we got that PlayStation, and then the first game I got was that Spyro Gateway to Glimmer because I knew how much I loved playing it.
Right. Yeah.
Obviously, many other games came after that, but that's got to be my old game. I love it. I still love it today. When they brought out the Reignited trilogy a couple of years ago, I got that, and I've got that on my downloaded on my PlayStation 3.
Oh.
Because I haven't
Okay.
got
Wow.
no no my PlayStation 4.
Yeah, you've got a four.
Forget
Yeah.
what one's out. One's out.
So,
So.
what is it about that game in particular? Are there any particular things about the gameplay itself, or anything that stand out to you that you think resonated with you when you were young?
Well, it's about a dragon,
Mm,
which I adore. I've got
yes, yes, you
my
do.
dragon calendar in the corner. Um,
Oh,
but
if you're
also,
listening to this rather than watching, I just gestured to a calendar behind me, which is Samantha's calendar with a red dragon on it. I think it's actually a Dungeons and Dragons calendar. Yeah, it is.
it is, which you got me for Christmas last year.
Oh, aren't I lovely? Okay, so it has a dragon in it. That's your first criteria met.
Yeah.
What else?
But also, most media around dragons is all about like fighting the dragon, killing the dragon,
Hmm.
conquering the dragon in some way. And I never liked that as a kid. I wanted to befriend dragons. They were cool. So this was about a dragon that wasn't a bad guy. He was
Hmm.
just exploring. Or I think in this particular game, he was trying to go on holiday and then he got kidnapped and had to save this other world instead.
Typical. I remember a time that happened to me constantly.
So that was nice. The fact that you were just playing like a dragon that was he was just a dragon. Like there wasn't anything good or bad about that. He just was a dragon, and he was saving this little world, despite the fact that he was very small, um,
Ah, okay.
which was a big part of the game. When they tried to when they tr- they had to get a dragon because the bad guy who was destroying their world hated dragons. They were like, right, if we get a dragon,
Hmm.
we can sort him out. And they get Spyro, who's like this tiny dragon, and they're just like, we were expecting something much bigger, and he's a bit like, what? What's wrong with me? So he goes and saves the world despite his small size.
I
Maybe
think
that resonated with me as well because I'm a very small person.
you are very small. I think that at that time as well, obviously on PC there were games that told stories for years prior to this, but console gaming and games specifically aimed was it late 90s PS1? Yeah, of course it was. Aimed at children. The idea of a bright, colourful game that also told a story was just coming into its own off the back of like Sonic and Mario, where the story was kind of in the background. Things like Spyro and Banjo Kazooie was a big one with the story on the N64. It was very similar to Spyro, in my opinion. Having the story embedded was just kind of coming into its own. Do you think that's part of why you liked it too? Because it told a story?
Probably because as I've developed as a gamer, my favourite games are ones that tell a good story. I really get into storylines in games. Um,
Yes, you do.
yeah, I do. I do
Sure, we're going to
get
hear
mad
about that
about.
later.
I'm sure you will hear about that later. Um, but also I think also another genre of game that I love now is open world, like open world exploring.
Hmm.
And of course, Spyro wasn't open world. Open world didn't exist by then, but it was kind of the precursor to open world stuff. Like because there were always like in each little world you visited in that game, there were like pockets of secret areas
Hmm.
that you could find, and then there were all these different collectibles you could get, and they were sometimes like hidden off around the corner, like, and you had to do different things to like get to these secret areas. So that kind of was like the precursor, I feel like, to those open world games, and I think that's probably one of the reasons why I loved it so much, because I was destined to love open world games.
Yeah, I think I understand exactly where you're coming from there. I played Spyro a little bit because my cousin had it, and they had a PS1 and I had an N64. Oh, what am I talking about? I got an N64 in 1996 when it was out. Yeah, I wasn't behind a generation at all, but I bought my own PS1. Anyway, I played it. My cousins had it, and I remember it being running around and it being very colourful. But I remember at the time, obviously, I was like a teenage boy, and I was much more into like shooting games and that kind of thing. I loved. We played in the I think at college we had a computer room that we had a game called Tribes on, which is kind of a multiplayer game that's very cognizant of early Halo. Um, I love that sort of thing. So those kind of younger targeted games, I missed out on them essentially because I mean they're great, and I just wasn't really interested in that kind of colourful look. Um,
Yeah.
but I did play the Skylanders games with my eldest son.
Oh
Um,
yeah, I remember those. I never played them.
yeah, well, I'm saying my eldest son. Sam knows my eldest son's name, but we're not going to put the names of my children on the podcast. But my eldest son, who is a very cool lad now, who like goes to the gym and does all the stuff. When he was little, he loved like Pokemon and all that kind of stuff. And the Skylanders series, which is a spin-off of Spyro, was a big part of our lives for that year when it was uh, very big. And that's the one where you have the little platform that you put the figures on, similar to Amiibos, and then you can play as the figure. We've still got some of the figures, and we put them on the Christmas tree each year. So Spyro's got a place in my heart for that reason. Um, okay, so the next thing, so that's your something old,
Yep.
and in the context of your life, of course, that is old because you were very young when it came out. For me, that doesn't seem as old, and I'm sure if there's anyone listening who's older than me, that's probably going to seem fairly recent. These things are all relative, so the idea of what's old or new is pretty loose. Like it's open to your interpretation. It's more about how you feel about it. So to that end, we're going to go with something new.
No. Now this one I struggled with when you told me the concept, because
Yeah.
I haven't I'm not really that up with new games as they come out. Usually I don't buy them because I wait until like they drop down in price or go onto Game Pass or something before I do. Hmm.
Just for anyone listening, I'm in the room with Sam's game collection, the physical games, not the digital ones. I can actually see your PlayStation game collection here,
Can you?
many of
Okay.
which were bought within at least a month of launch. But I understand what you mean. Like a lot of the time, work gets in the way, doesn't it? And you end up coming to a game very late because you don't have the time
Yeah.
to play the big ones.
Also, I don't have a PS5 yet, and I didn't get an Xbox Series S until about a year ago, so I was a bit behind with getting the most recent games. And also because it's an Xbox Series S and doesn't have a huge amount of space, I usually don't buy new games as they come out. So so for me, new, I kind of decided, right, I'm going to have to go with what I feel is new rather than what the general consensus
Yeah.
feels is new. And I sort of narrowed it down to two.
Okay, you
And
narrowed
now
it
I'm
down to
gonna,
two.
yeah,
Ooh.
and now I'm gonna have to decide which one to give you. Um,
You did
and
say
I
that you
think,
were going to wait till the very last moment, didn't you?
yeah, and I think I'm going to go with. Can I pick a series rather than an individual game? Is that okay?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, we are sounding out the rules as we go. If you can justify to me why it should be the series in the game, then I suppose that's fine. Yeah,
I'm
sure.
going to justify. I'm going to justify.
Of
Okay,
course you can. Of
and
course you can.
it's going to be, and you might have guessed this by looking at my game collection over there, but the Horizon Zero Dawn games.
Oh, yeah. Okay. I mean, game one and game two are essentially just one
That's
game.
why I was. That's why I was going to justify it. It's all
Yeah.
carrying on from the same story.
Now,
Even
with the new
though
game, one rule I didn't think of at all is we're going to be careful to avoid story spoilers. And also, something that bugs a lot of people I see on YouTube comments and stuff is we're going to avoid late game gameplay mechanic spoilers if we can as well. So
that's
like
okay.
enemies you might unlock and all of that kind of stuff because some people might not have played it yet. Whereas with older games, I'm a little bit less. Well, that's 25 years old, so you know. So yeah, so let's talk about the
Yeah.
Horizon series, which feels wrong because that feels like the racing game.
I know.
Horizon Zero
So I
Dawn,
call them,
Horizon Forbidden West series.
yeah. I just call them the Horizon Zero. Well, I think a lot of people call them the Zero, like the Zero Dawn series, even though that's
Ah,
like the name of the first game.
throwing
But
it
yeah,
right
those
out of
games.
the car.
Um, and actually, I want to talk more about the first one, even though that one came out about 10 years ago. But it's still newer than those Spyro games, so I feel like it counts.
10 years ago, really?
It did. It
I mean,
did.
I'm in
Yeah.
my 40s, right? So, like, for me, 10 years is like blip blip.
It
Oh,
was quite. It was quite a while. Well, I don't think it was quite 10 years ago, but it was quite a while ago. It was probably like about 2017, 2016. It's not quite 10 years, but still quite a way away.
mm.
But anyway, I'm gonna pick that one anyway,
Okay.
because that game, I love that, I adore that game, because it sort of it encompasses pretty much my favorite kind of game. It's got a really well developed story to the point that I was going back to the game because I wanted to know more about what was happening and what
Right,
was going
yeah.
to happen here. Like I was blown away by the concept, and I loved the setting as well. Like it's set in the future, but everyone is these kind of hunter gatherer people.
Yeah.
Like so they're kind of tribal hunter gatherers, but then there are these big mechanical robots all over the place. And that's just the setting. And I was like, that's such a good setting because immediately you're there going, what? These are hunter gatherer
Yeah.
tribal people, but there's robots everywhere. So immediately, just the fact that they just used the setting to pique the interest of the audience, I thought was just really clever because you're looking at that going, what's going on here? These look like ancient people, but there's robots.
One
And I
of
was just like, that one for me was just so like, oh, brilliant.
It is very visually stunning as well. The art direction is fantastic, and the work that must have gone into not just making those animals, but studying how animals move and the animation. Just that as like a technical proof of concept is fascinating. I didn't even play it. I've just watched you play it, and I find it really engaging. For anyone who's not familiar with the Horizon Zero Dawn Forbidden West series, it is absolutely beautiful on both the PS4 and the PS5. These stunning kind of open plains landscape, and there's very much, I think, certainly with the costume design, there's a lot of reference to native cultures in North America and South America, like Maya, Inca, Aztec, and then what we blanket refer to as like the Native American peoples, who and of which there are huge amounts, and I'm fairly ignorant of. All of the different sort of tribes or nation states that exist in the Horizon world have a distinct culture of their own, and it's quite peaceful as well. It's quite in some cases it's agrarian, like lots of farming. In other cases it's kind of hunting related, and then they have gods and spirits that they worship. And then also there's this kind of mechanized element to it as well. So a lot of them wear metal armor and bits of scrap that they've taken as trophies from the creatures. And I found it just as fascinating as you did, just watching it. An interesting observation that it made to me ages ago is it's the only game, or one of the few games, where you play the combat on the hardest difficulty.
Yes, it is. It's the only game that I have played that I've played it through on the hardest difficulty and enjoyed it.
Yeah,
I'm not a fan of hard games. Souls-like games, I will never play. I will never. Well, I will never play. I will never enjoy. I will. I will watch other people play them, but I will not play them myself because I don't like dying. It makes me angry. So, but I felt I felt like the combat in that game. It made me feel like I was skilled.
okay,
Like,
yeah,
I'm sure it was the combat itself being like, the way they designed it, but the fact that it made me feel like I was the skilled one, I thought was really great. That was really cleverly done. Like, because usually, like, if a game's easy, you're just kind of like, yeah, well, they've just lowered the difficulty. They've just lowered the HP bars of the enemies, or like made
yeah,
it so they don't fire at you as much. But this felt like, even on the hardest difficulty, that it was me and my skill,
yeah.
and that was great for me.
I think as well, like I picked this up from you talking about it really, but just watching, because I played it a little bit on the normal difficulty, and I didn't. I don't think I just didn't have the time at the time when you recommended it to me. I was working a lot of the time, but definitely I notice on screen a difference in tactics. Like when you play it, you are rolling a lot, like a Souls-like game, just rolling everywhere. But also
Yeah.
you're running around collecting items, crafting arrows on the fly, getting in cover, waiting for it to do an attack pattern, and then kind of leave itself open. Then you roll out, shoot, 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 target lots of weak points, and then you have to run away again, because if you just stand there, you can't just stand there and soak up hits, because these huge monsters will just start smashing you, or pick you up and throw you, or bash you out of the way, or whatever.
Yeah. So, and one of the things with these monsters, so I've got a zoology degree, and I love the morphology of animals, so
Yeah.
like how animals look, how they move, how they interact with their environment. And so this is something that, and so when I've looked at the creatures that you fight in that game,
Hmm.
you know, there's been a lot of thought and a lot of research from the developers to create like creatures that both, obviously they've taken inspiration from the natural world, um, and they've used that to kind of see, right, well, how would that animal fight? How would it? So there's a lot of times when the animals just run into you and just careen themselves into you, and they then fall over on the floor. And I kind of like, and I liked that, because I was like, there's this. When a lot of the ways a lot of animals fight is a desperation to just get the opponent. It's not it doesn't look pretty. It's rolling around on the floor. They look ridiculous, but there's a desperation in a lot of animals just to get this fight done and over with. And they've captured that really well in the way the animals fight you. And like you said, you can't just stand there, because some of these creatures are huge. If they run into you, that's half your health gone.
Hmm. Yeah, and you get stunned as well, and also as a player you get disorientated, because the screen shakes and Aloy ends up halfway across the map. You stand up, you don't know where you are, you don't know where the creature is. There's a wall in front of you here, and you're like,
Yeah.
okay, where can I go and like duck down into the grass and hide and just get my breath back, not Aloy's breath, but my breath. I wanted to ask
Yeah.
you. I suspected this one would come up. So for anyone listening, Sam didn't tell me what these were going to be ahead of time, so that we could just kind of do this naturally, au naturel. Um, but I suspected this one would come up. Um, One of the things I like is that the character of Aloy, who is a very, very competent 17-year-old, which is something you don't see very often. You usually see teenagers in films and games represented like idiots, even though they're not. They're just as capable. Sometimes I would argue more capable than the rest of us, because they don't have a cascade of mistakes behind them to smash their self confidence. But Aloy is played by oh my god, I've just forgotten her first name.
Oh, what, the voice actress?
Yeah, I know her second name. It's Birch. Ashley Birch. Ashley Birch, who also does the voice, or does loads of voices in video games, but she also does the voice for Tiny Tina in Borderlands, which is
Oh,
another
yeah.
game that I played through you. um, And although Tiny Tina, the character itself, isn't, I wouldn't say, a vision of female empowerment. It's a caricature character. Certainly a very prominent character in that series. And I like how, if you follow Ashley Birch's career as a video game voiceover artist, you see these, not necessarily empowered, not always very positively represented, but you see these striking, original, interesting female and diverse female characters that are doing something different, and they aren't just the sort of stereotypical damsel in distress or whatever. They're either an active participant in the world, or they are the protagonist, and that kind of thing. And I think that it's quite telling that you're gravitating to these channels of games that have these interesting female characters in them, and I like that about about your gaming habits. So
it's interesting that you. It's
yeah, no,
interesting
you're
that you
right.
picked that up. It's interesting that you obviously picked that up because my other reason for loving that game is the fact that you play this really strong female character, um, and also that see, because obviously, like, being a woman and a young girl into gaming, when I was younger, most of the games were aimed at men and boys, and therefore had like male protagonists, which was fine. Like, I didn't mind playing as a guy, but of course when the women started coming in, it was like, yes, I didn't know I needed this, here it
Yeah,
is, I'm so happy. And however, a lot of the time the female characters, if it was a main female character, there was a reason they were female, and there had to be like some kind of reason they were female. Like, whereas in this one, and I was sort of waiting to see if that would come up. There was no. She was happened to be the person in this situation, and her gender had no bearing on that. And I loved that. And the diversity among all the groups, like all the tribes, I think they've made a really good effort to put diversity in every tribe. So like, there's not just a tribe of, like, say, white people, or a tribe of people of color. Like, there's the diversity in each tribe is huge. Like, there's all different kinds of people, if you will. Like, and then there's different, and there's men in power, there's women in power. There is one tribe that has a history of sexism, and they've sort of like been dealing with that and like making things better. So, like, each tribe kind of has this background, the social kind of background where and I just felt like the developers just really thought and really cared about the game, and that's why I had to put it in there, because I really love it.
yeah. I mean, there seem to be so many reasons why you should love it and do love it, and I think that's the thing as well. Is there are a lot of divided opinions about representation in games and stuff. We're not going to get into that. Personally, I'm a fan of it. As a a cis het white man in my 40s, who is also a parent, a lot of default characters in games look and sound and act like me, and have my concerns and my motivations. And I like, in my films and my games and my books, to see the opinions of other people who aren't like me. Because if I'm only reading the thoughts and feelings and the actions of people like me, sometimes that's cool in like adventure books and that kind of thing. But I don't only want that. I want to sort of see what's coming up from the point of view of other people and how they might think about that, because it helps me to grow as a person, and learn and be better, I suppose. One thing about Horizon is that, in terms of representation and stuff, because of the brutal life that they all lead, hunting and gathering and fighting these horrible mechanized creatures, there are people with like arms off and
Oh yeah.
legs off, so that there's actually disability representation in there, in like a much more natural way than you often see disability representation. It's just people who've lost their arm and they're just carrying on with life, which is what people do. They get through their lives, they carry on. You have a stroke and you end up in a wheelchair. You don't just stop. You carry on living, and you participate in your own life, and you see your friends, and you do all that stuff. And all of the people that you see in that game who are disabled in some way, or have an impairment or whatever, they're all just doing their best to live their lives, which is what you see in real life, rather than just being these victims that have to be looked after by the able-bodied people. Ableism, that's the word I'm looking for.
Oh yeah.
It seems to have less ableism, because sometimes with representation you end up with, like, you can end up with sexism, or you can end up with racism, or you can end up with ableism, I said we wouldn't get into this, but we have. But because of the way it's represented, so then it's like, okay, how are we representing things in the way they would and should be in the real world? Fascinating game and great choice. I'm not surprised you picked that one. So that's you're something old and you're something new. So the next one we're going to go for is something borrowed. This is a very loose interpretation. Borrowed. It could be like somebody insisted that you play it and you ended up liking it, or you literally physically borrowed a game, or maybe it's that you watched like a YouTube channel playing it and you're like, oh, that's, and you think of it as their game, but now you play it, that kind of thing. So what's your something borrowed?
My something borrowed is heavily related to you. I've only
Aha.
played these games through because of you, and it's the Halo series.
Oh yeah. I need a weapon.
So,
Oh, Halo, yeah.
are you excited to get to talk about Halo in your first podcast?
Heck yeah.
So, Halo, obviously being a gamer for like pretty much my whole life, it
I
had not
can hear
escaped
the
my
music
notice.
in my head. I can hear. I just and then. Okay, I'm going to calm down. I'm going to let you speak. For anyone listening, if you haven't played Halo yet because you're young or you just missed it or whatever and you're not familiar with it, it's a series of first-person shooter games with a rich and interesting future sci-fi story, and it tackles the idea of being a superhuman, a super soldier, love and loss, but not in the romantic kind, more like the fraternal kind. And it's also just visually stunning and has these wonderful set pieces and high concept science fiction ideas. And now I'm going to hand back to Sam.
Okay, your excitement tempered a bit now.
Sorry, yeah.
So, so obviously being a gamer my whole life, and being into fantasy and sci-fi in general, it had not escaped my notice that this Halo series was quite well respected and well talked about. However, I never enjoyed first-person shooters. I was never kind of I guess wasn't necessarily a fan of like violent games. Like not for any particular reason. They just weren't my sort of thing. And so like things like guns, I was just like, nah,
Yeah,
never mind,
sure, yeah.
not interested. So like
So there was a barrier for you there because
yeah.
you had preconceptions from whatever other kinds of games that, yeah.
I wanted to engross myself in fantasy and sci-fi, and I know that Halo is obviously about as sci-fi as you can get, but I always equated guns with like military games, so therefore I kind of wasn't interested. And it's not so much that I had anything against Halo. I can remember like loads of my friends, most of my friends when I was growing up who were into games were boys, and of course most of them loved Halo. And I never had anything against it. I just never kind of got round to playing it.
Yeah.
And then of course you loved it so much that we decided we'd sit down and play the whole thing through together.
Yeah.
And we haven't finished Infinite. Is Infinite the most recent one?
Oh, so yeah, the reason we haven't done Infinite is because we didn't realise they'd released the co-op yet.
Oh, but we have done like the first couple of missions, I
I
think.
don't remember. I know that we did 1, 2, 3, and 4,
Yeah.
and then we did 5. And actually, we best just talk this out from my point of view. So we played 1, and I warned Sam. I was like, look, 1 is a bit dated now. It's a great game for those of us who grew up with it, but it's a bit hard. You can get lost quite easily. It's a bit basic. But we did play the remaster, which was an Xbox 360 remaster. So graphically, it was a bit easier to navigate. But we got through 1, and it was like, oh, this is okay. Obviously, for me, Halo 2 and Halo 3 are the ones that really mattered. So we played Halo 2, the remaster that was done for Xbox One, and we played it on a Series S, I think. And did we split screen that, or did we do 2 Xboxes for
We
Halo
might
2?
have done 2 Xboxes, 2 TVs.
Yeah. And then we did 3, and then we did 4. Now, I'm one of the few people who doesn't hate 343 Industries. I loved Halo 4 when it came out. It's actually one of the first games. In 2012, I asked my mum, and I was in my 30s, I asked my mum to buy me new, because it happened to come out around my birthday, so I got it new for 40 quid, and I was like, and I remember setting it up in my 360 and installing it, and that first scene where you get out onto the planet and you see the new enemies for the first time. I was just absolutely bowled away, and I loved the story. And a lot of people didn't like the story, but I did. So we played through those, and then I warned Sam. I was like, "Look, Halo 5. Oh no, did we play ODST and Reach first before we played Halo 5?
Was 5 the one where you play as the other squad?
You get Nathan Fillion and yeah.
Yes. Yeah, no, we'd played ODST and Reach before we played.
So I think
Yeah.
we played them in order of release,
We
actually.
played them in release order because I wanted to
So
because I always want to play things in release order.
okay, so we played 1, 2, and 3. Then we played ODST, which I actually didn't like that much, but I fell in love with it playing it with you because I knew just enough about it to be able to remember the story, but not quite enough. And then some of the weird stuff where you can get stuck. If you're playing that game and you get stuck, I have this advice: look up. And then we played Reach, which was actually a really good co-op experience. It was great. That was a great game, and a lovely story. A bit sad, but lovely. Then we played 4. Then when we played 5, I said to you, "Look, 5 is like absolutely rubbish. It's terrible. You can't see anything." Da, da, da. But I'd played it solo. Playing it co-op, it was so much fun.
It
Um,
makes me think. It makes me feel like that's how they intended the games to be played.
yeah, well,
I've
certainly
only
5.
experienced it co-op, and a lot of the fun was us coming at it with like plans or sort of like riding through. I usually did the driving, and you usually did the shooting. That was always quite fun. But what was
Sam came from a beginner warthog driver going, oh my god, why is it going over here? Oh no, I've rolled it, to literally like power sliding round a gun emplacement while I take the whole thing out, and then she go round, go away, come in for another pass, and just have these perfect loop systems going. It was mint.
what was fun? What was interesting for me though is obviously like throughout my entire what it came out when I was like quite young. I don't know.
Well, it's
I don't know what
2000
year it
and
was.
people. If you're listening to this comments or messages or whatever, I'm not researching it. I'm not looking it up. Believe it was 2001,
Yeah. So I was about
maybe.
10 when it came out. So
Yeah.
pretty much um, most of my gaming life, people have been talking about Halo. So there were things I was aware of. I knew who Master Chief was. I knew who Cortana was. I knew she was like an AI. I knew that he was like a super soldier. I knew that they were fighting these like kind of this alien race.
Well,
You know,
aliens civilization essentially,
yeah,
isn't
that's
it?
what
Yeah.
I know. But that's what I thought at the
Oh,
time.
sorry. Yeah, yeah,
That's
yeah,
all I
yeah.
knew.
I wasn't
Um,
correcting you. I
so
meant I was like trying to sound it.
yeah. So
It's men like
when
me
we
that put
played.
women like you off of Halo by correcting you constantly, going, "Well, actually, the Covenant are a society of blah
Just,
blah blah." Blah.
it's okay. You're just very excited. I know.
You can't help it sometimes. People care about their games, you know. Anyway, I will shut up. Carry on.
So playing the first one through, especially, one of the things that struck me one was that how short the story was, and I was like, oh wow, that was like quite. It was almost like a movie, like like it was quite.
Yeah.
You arrive on this planet, it's kind of empty. Well, not planet. You arrive on that ring, it's kind of empty. Stuff happens. Whoa, you're the only. And then off you go. Like, and the big thing was I didn't know the entire way through that that I knew what the Flood were. I didn't know that the Flood and this alien people you were fighting were a separate thing. I had no idea about that,
Yeah.
and I also had no idea that the Flood were essentially like. Are you okay with me spoiling the first game?
Oh, so we'll do it succinctly. I think if you've got to this point and you don't know what Halo's all about, essentially, well, I think when they were designing it, they wanted to have lots of different types of monsters, right? So that tactically, you get used to fighting a certain set, and then when you move into another section of a level or another level or whatever, suddenly everything you learnt in the previous level goes, and you need something else. You need new weapons, you
Yeah.
need new strategies. That was why. So the way that they did that is they had small enemies, they had huge meat shield enemies, and then they had like floods of kind of zombies and stuff coming at you. I wouldn't say that's a spoiler for a 22-year-old game. That's
It was
fine.
more to do with you okay with me like spoiling about like what the Flood are? You
Oh,
mind?
let's stay out of the
Like,
specifics. Yeah, like it's just some
fine.
monsters that come running at you. Yeah.
Well, I just didn't know that the Flood were basically zombies.
Right. Yeah. Sure.
I had no idea. This blew my mind. It blew my mind that I hadn't known this the entire time, and that is the entire thing of the Halo game. And when we learned that, when first of all I learned that the Flood and the Covenant were different, I was like, oh, wow, I didn't know that. And then, of course, learning that the Flood are basically like space zombies, I was just like, oh my God. I was like, I couldn't believe that, like, I hadn't picked up on that the entire, like, 20 years at this point that the game had been out. And
Yeah.
that really blew my mind.
There are some great documentaries actually from the original developers because, of course, they're not that old. These people are like my age, or maybe in their like early 50s now, and so they're still around. They're still talking about the design process for these games. And I watched a few documentaries and stuff, and they a lot of the storytelling was born, much like with Horizon Zero Dawn. The storytelling was born out of these technical concepts that they wanted to put out there, and up until Halo, all first-person shooters, mostly apart from a couple, took place in dark corridors with lots of corners, with the odd big room to fight a boss in, or the odd big obstacle to get around, and that was mostly due to kind of loading time restrictions and that sort of thing. With Halo, they start like that. You start on the ship, and then when you land on the Halo ring, all of a sudden it opens up into this huge landscape unexpectedly. And they wanted a reason to do that, right? So they needed to create a planet or an installation or a space station or whatever it is, a reason for you to get out in this big open world. And they were like, why not make it this big lush green environment? And the fact that they keep going back to surprising you is part of what made that game so rich and interesting for new players, because when I played Halo 1 for the first time, I actually played 2 first, I was just a dumb kid who was busy with like my life. I didn't really take on board that there was complex storytelling going on. I also didn't know that the Flood were like a separate thing from the Covenant, or I was like, they're just all baddies. And then the subtlety of the storytelling in that game just took me with it, and it raised my expectations for storytelling in games. And I'm sure everyone's got a game that did that for them. It might not be Halo for you, it might be something else, but you have these moments in games where you're like, okay, yeah, it can be this good. Now everything else has to be this good, or I have to lower my own expectations of it. Um, yeah, great choice. Oh, another observation I wanted to bring in the same way that I cut you off earlier and just got really excited and talked over the top of you. It's been my experience with, I think there's definitely a gender thing here with a lot of female gamers with boyfriends or whatever who are excited about a series. It can be quite oppressive when someone knows a game series or a TV series or a film series or a book series really, really well, and they really want to share it, and they just push the whole thing on you. Do you mind if I tell you they barricaded themselves in
Oh yeah,
joke?
go on.
So Sam had a boyfriend when she was young. I can't remember his name, but you did tell me, who loved the Halo series so much and wanted to share it with her, and that's a wonderful thing, right? But when you're young, you don't really know how to moderate your, or apparently when you're in your 40s, you don't know how to moderate your enthusiasm. So he kind of like had all the richness of the lore and all the little minute tiny observations and all of the little observations that various YouTubers had done over the years, sat Sam down in front of it and expected her to have the same experience that he had. And there was this whole bit about an observation that people had barricaded themselves inside a room instead of outside to stop the Flood from coming in, and he got really angry
Yeah.
with her when she didn't notice.
I didn't get the significance. The whole point, the whole idea was, I remember that like the Covenant are these big, scary monsters, and they had barricaded themselves in against something else. And I didn't get the significance of this, and he got really angry with me because I didn't understand. And I remember him going to me, "They barricaded themselves in," and I was just like, "Okay." And it's like, yeah, that's true what you're saying about, like, I think some people, yeah, like, there's a lot of jokes that fly around about kind of, there's a lot of memes out there kind of like of the person trying to get on with their life and the friend being like, you have to come, have you watched that show yet? Have you watched it yet? Have you watched that show yet? Have you watched it yet? Have you watched it yet? Come on, let's watch it. Come on, let's watch it. Okay, look, season 1 and 2 are crap, but we're gonna get through them, okay? And you're just there like, oh my God, like.
And you're like, you've watched
So, like,
the first episode and you're like, oh my
yeah,
God, I
this
can't.
is not for
This
me.
is absolute trash. We've had that with a few Netflix series and stuff over the years, where you've
You didn't want to
loved
watch
them.
Wednesday, but you loved it in the end.
Oh, that's true. I didn't mind Wednesday. Yeah, and I think with games that were that big and meant so much to so many people, it can be really hard to use the expression again, moderate your enthusiasm to allow someone to develop a love for something that you love.
Yes. You were very good while we played the game. You didn't put. You just kind of let us. You could let us play it, and there was a few times you were like, "Oh, oh, oh," and then you just went, "Okay, hang on, no, I'll play it."
Yeah, because I think had I been younger and less kind of experienced at the diversity of the storytelling in games and stuff, I think if it was my first experience of a good story in a game, I might not have been able to hold back. I might have been like, "Oh, you've got to know this," blah, 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 and spoilt the whole thing before you played it. But because I hung back and allowed you to kind of just notice what you noticed and not get angry at you for not noticing what you didn't notice, you get to have your own experience. And you, with a good story, a good long form story, you have realizations over the course of your entire life after you've read it or played it or watched it. You go back to it and you go, "Oh yeah, of course," because storytelling is the way that we pass and interpret and hold on to wisdom and knowledge in a lot of ways. So they need time to simmer in the brain. You can't just force someone to have all the same revelations as you immediately. But Halo is definitely one of those series that contains a lot and contradicts itself a lot and rewrites the rulebook quite a few times. The character of Master Chief goes from being a big dumb idiot to a really complex, thoughtful character, back to being a big dumb idiot when he needs to, and you're kind of invested, so you kind of tolerate the changes, or maybe you hate Halo and you don't, and that's absolutely fine too, because it's an individual experience, isn't it? Okay, so thank you so much for including a game that I loved.
Okay.
And definitely, I think a game series is definitely an appropriate interpretation of the weird rules. Okay, so for the fourth thing, then we're going to do something blue, something that has a tenuous connection to the concept of blueness, be it the color or the mood or anything at all. So you tell me what your something blue is.
This one was another one that I thought about, and I've actually gone with Blue the Feeling.
Oh, like
Um,
sadness, like maudlin?
yes,
Okay.
like melancholy. And now this game made me feel this way, made me feel lots of ways. And I wouldn't necessarily say the feeling of blue is a bad thing, but the fact that it caused me to feel all these things was to me great. Something I love in stories. You know this game well as well. It's Spiritfarer.
Oh, yeah. Oh, I love Spiritfarer.
Yeah, which actually I love that game. I could play it through again, and again and again and again. You found it first, and you told me about it, and I can remember you messaged me saying, "I just gave a hedgehog a hug. I just had a mission to give a hedgehog a hug." And I was
Oh,
like,
yeah.
"Okay, I've got to download this game." And
That
that
hedgehog was
game,
easily my favourite, um, what is it, friend? Like, yeah,
yeah.
person. We'll be very careful
So
not to spoil Spiritfarer for anyone who
yeah, yeah.
is interested in
Spiritfarer is
playing
a
it.
really, I think, is a good example of a very beautiful game. Like it was clearly designed with aesthetics in mind. The obviously the artwork, it's like a 2D, it's sort of a 2D it's a 2D platformer, really.
Mm-hmm.
Um, with an incorporation of kind of like building, like you kind of build, you literally build houses on a boat where
Mm-hmm.
like your community can live, and you look after them. They eat there and sleep there, and you do everything on this boat, and you look after your little community that you make.
And unlike a lot of NPC buddies in communities, they aren't completely useless. They are doing their
Oh no,
own
they do
thing,
things
and
for you. Yeah,
yeah, doing things for you and things for each other, and talking and
yeah,
thinking. And there's a world going on outside of you, the main character, talking to people. They have their own relationships in some ways, and yeah,
yeah. So this was the game I was choosing between, with saying for something new as well.
yeah, it's fairly
Um,
new, isn't it? It's like 3 or 4 years
yeah,
old, I think.
yeah. So but I had to go with Horizon Zero Dawn in the end for my new game 'cause for
Yeah.
some weird reason. I consider it new, even though it's actually quite old.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah. So with Spiritfarer, but the journey you go on with each character, and like each character like develops and reflects on their life that
Yeah.
they've had before they joined you on this boat, and you learn they kind of come to you with, this is me, this is who I am, this is my story, and then as you talk to them, they slowly like come to terms with things that's happened in their lives, and they talk to you, and they help, and it was just very emotional because all the characters have all these different kind of, there'll be a character there that you relate to and you'll just go, oh my god,
Oh,
that is.
absolutely. Because so many of them, like real people, are so flawed.
Hmm.
There is a particular character I'm thinking of that I didn't necessarily relate to, but I certainly, as a man with male friends and like lad culture and all of that stuff, I've certainly seen those behaviours, and it makes you wince, and you're like, oh god. And then you really want him to have this redemption and just become this new person, and in some ways they do, and in some ways they don't, and you're like, oh yeah, people don't just get healed instantly. And for me, that's what Spiritfarer is about the understanding that there are many, many forms of tragedy and many, many forms of loss, and you don't just miraculously one day feel instantly better. It's a constantly developing, interweaving, and sometimes regressing process of never ending realization that the losses that you experience and other people experience around you are part and parcel of the victories and the wins and the positive things that come your way. Uh, yeah, that was the
Yeah.
effect it had on me. It was to help me realize that about my own life and look around at the people close to me and close to us, as a couple.
Yeah.
And
And I always think, like, as human beings, we relate to, we use stories and things to enable us to understand concepts and relate to things and have our own realizations. And I feel like when games do that, I feel a big sense of like validation,
mm-hmm.
because I mean, these days it's not so bad, but back when I was younger, probably when you were younger, there was quite a lot of the idea of games being dismissed.
Oh, absolutely,
It's,
yeah.
and obviously them just being not, they're not valid forms of media, not valid forms of art. They're just silly things to pass the time with. And I never liked this when I was younger. I actually, even in my zoology degree, I wrote my final paper on video games. I wrote it about, because actually I thought to myself, what can I talk about for 10,000 words and still be interested in at the end? And I was like, the only answer I come up with was video games. So I wrote my paper on the place video games have in science communication, in
Yeah,
a like putting actual real science fact into games to kind of help educate the public. And actually, the main game that I drew a lot of stuff. Drew a lot of inspiration from were the Assassin's Creed games, because there's so much in the Assassin's Creed games that are accurate history, and I found history boring before that. And then when I played
yeah.
Assassin's Creed 3 in particular, I was like, oh, when I found out that all the assassinations you do are real assassinations that happened in that history, I just kind of just made me go, oh my god, history was actually really dramatic and really interesting. Like, why I didn't think that beforehand, I don't know. But
Well,
the
because
games,
you presented
yeah,
it at school in a way. The
yeah,
method you're presented is boring. The content's not boring, but the sitting in a classroom writing, listening to someone drone on is
yeah.
like it's not exciting.
That that game though presented it to me in such an interesting way that I was involved in. I was fascinated, and I've
Yeah,
been interested in history ever since. And so I was very much like, well, games can surely do this for science. And so when games now, like going bringing this all back to Spiritfarer, when games like cause you to have these big emotional reactions and kind of like almost reflect on your own life and look at what these characters have been through, I'm like, to me, I'm like, this really solidifies games for me as an important part of our society. It's an important part of our culture. They are, they are, they're, they're a new way of experiencing things. Like, the way you experience a story in a game is not the same as reading, and it's not the same as watching something on TV, because you're interacting. All of those things have value, and games have their own special value because you are interacting with the characters. You know, you get to choose what can happen in a character's life. You know, like in Spiritfarer, there are times when you find things out and you make the decision as to whether you tell a character or not. You know, you decide what to do, and then of course that charts that character's journey through their own self-discovery. You take part in that, and that is something that games can do, storytelling wise, that no other form of media can. And to me, that's very validating to kind of have games as this really important part of media in our society now. And that's kind of what I think of as Spiritfarer.
I completely agree, and a in a more ephemeral sense, just talking about spirituality and philosophy and psychology, the human ability to transpose your consciousness into something or someone else is a big part of why we have survived as a species. Our ability to adapt doesn't come from brutality or logistical planning. Those things are really important, you know, but it comes from our ability to imagine we are something or someone else, and for good reasons or evil, work out the best way to then handle that thing. When I'm driving a car, my consciousness, I was an Amazon driver for like a year, and then I had a van business. You know that, the listeners might not. My ability to be aware of where the physical limitations of my vehicle actually are became, I'm not afraid to say, I became an expert driver. Like, I could get that van into the tiniest of spots without even thinking. I couldn't see behind me, and you're just like, whoa, whoa. And that came
Regularly
from
validated your driving.
yeah, from practice and muscle memory, and also a few mistakes as well. But eventually, I just had a sense of where the vehicle was in space. There's a name for that, like not vestigial. What's it called? Vestibular sense, where you knowing where you are in space.
Oh yeah, is vestibular something or
So the
other,
vestibular. If you're listening to this and you know the answers to that, well, the sense of where you are in space has a name. I think it's vestibular senses or something like that. And yeah, that transposed out to the vehicle. With gaming, you are given the ability to sublimate your consciousness temporarily into someone else, and it might be somebody that you feel very close to, or it might be somebody that you don't. With Stella in Spiritfarer, like as a dad and a man, that the character of Atle the frog was actually the one I resonated with the most. But controlling Stella and understanding Stella's relationship with the world that she's in, and all of the stuff she has to go and do, in addition to the gameplay loop of mining, crafting, selling, buying, all of that fun stuff, there's also this sense of her exploring and uncovering and then taking ownership of this little world she's in. And getting to know the little moody, the times of day that you can go and speak to the people on the boat. Some of them don't like to be woken up. There's like a younger character in the game whose bedroom is always a mess, and that kind of thing. All of those things, and how you learn through Stella to be more patient with the characters on the ship. For me, I was going through a time in my personal life where I was very impatient. I had a bad job. I was very, very stressed and snowed under by work. I was physically injured. I was just very irritable, very worried about money. And playing that game alleviated so much pressure off my soul that enabled me to just be a bit more forgiving of the people around me, and recognise that, like in the game, the people around me are going through their own stuff as well, and I need to not be one of their problems. And actually, that's a big part of what Spiritfarer was all about for me. Was a person learning to not be a problem, but be an asset to the people around them, and still retain their identity and still have needs. You know, Stella has a lot of needs in that game. Also, side note, what a beautiful soundtrack!
Oh yeah, everything about the game is beautiful. Like I said, there's a lot of it about aesthetics and relaxing and emotions, and you know, like yeah, it's very chill, but you will feel greatly if you play it.
Yeah, it definitely is. It's one, if you are going through a process of therapy and you're concerned about healing, and you're very much focused on that, rather than in a time where you're just busy and you're kind of fine in your head. It's a very powerful thing. Whether it's good or bad from a therapy point of view, I couldn't say, but it certainly will get inside you and resonate if you have the patience for that slower kind of collect them up kind of game. Some people just want to shoot stuff, and that's fine. But yeah, I think that's an absolutely fantastic choice, and I definitely recommend it. The reason I discovered it is that it came out on Game Pass, and I was like, oh, what's this? Oh. And it was actually there for a while, and I occasionally on a Sunday night after I talked to my youngest son in over in America, I would just stay on the Xbox and just have a look through X-Pass through Game Pass, and pick 3 or 4 games, download them, and just kind of play them through. And if one of them stuck, I'd play it. Cool. What a great choice. Thanks so much. So now we're on to the final segment of the podcast, which is I can't remember if I came up with this name or if you did, or it was a combination of the two of us. But the name of the section is "Why don't you just marry it then?" So what is your 5th and final game for "Why don't you just marry it then"?
So my game for if is the most likely for you to shout that at me, basically.
Yeah, or for the respective potential guest or listener, perhaps your husband or wife or significant other, or your jealous pet who wants your time and attention and be frustrated, like, oh, you're playing that again, are you?
I'm sick of hearing you talk about that game.
Yeah.
Why don't you just marry it then? Pokemon.
Of course, it's
Yes.
Pokemon. All the Pokemons, right? The whole.
All of them.
Yeah.
I'm obsessed with Pokemon. I've got Pokemon things all around me right now. You can probably see Pokemon things where you're sitting. You probably see plenty of them.
I can see a Vaporeon painting, a Vaporeon teddy, about 3 Charizards, is it? Various dragon-themed Pokemon.
Charizard and Charizard's X and Y form, actually.
Yeah, and then obviously you've got the Nintendo Switch down there with... is it Sword and Shield? No, you've got Scarlet and Violet, and you've got Legends of... Is it Arceus or Arceus?
Well, I've always said Arceus.
Arceus, okay. And yeah, there's probably various other things I can't quite see dotted around. Yeah, oh no, there's a Charmander there. Here, look.
Yeah.
If you're watching on video, I'm holding the Charmander up to the camera. Is that Charmander? Yeah.
Yes, that's Charmander.
And then there's this one. What's this one? Charmeleon.
That's Charmeleon. I know exactly which one you're
There he is, holding him up to the camera. And him or her? Are they both genders?
They can be either.
Okay, and then there's this origami that my son got you for Christmas last year.
Yeah.
Okay. Anyway, so talk to me about Pokemon. Why do you love the Pocket Monsters so much?
I've been playing Pokemon since it came out, since Red and Blue came out. I played those through. I played Yellow, but it was Gold and Silver that I loved the most. And I think it's probably because you go, you do the whole region and then you go to the other region, Kanto, again as well. So it's like double the size of the game. I've heard that's because they intended to stop it at Gold and Silver and it not go any furter.
Proof that money really does make the world go round, eh?
Yeah, so that's clearly not what happened, is it? Because now we're on. I can't remember what the number generation it is now, but we're on to over 1,000 Pokemon now with the most recent one.
I
can't name every single one, though I could probably name most of them.
I'm not sure what my source is on this. It might be Adam Blank on Remember the Game, so it might not be 100% accurate, but I think Pokemon is the best-selling toy ever. It's just in history, because if you just all of the merchandise and the toys and the teddies and all of that, I've heard it's the best-selling toy in human history.
I love games where you go out and explore the world, so there's a big tick. And as I said, I've got a zoology degree. I love creatures. I love fantasy creatures. So a game where it was all about finding fantasy creatures and then having them as your friends was just there you go. What more can I say? That was it. And I absolutely adore Pokemon. I always will. I have a Pokemon tattoo. It was the first tattoo I got, and I still love it. I got Lugia, which is the legendary.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Silver. There is one of those in your eye shop.
I was cycling through your tattoos in my head, going.
Yeah.
What is it? Yeah.
That one. It's my Lugia one. So, and it's funny because when you said, the whole "why don't you just marry it then" concept, in my head I was like, well, I literally started a Twitch streaming channel to talk about Pokemon because I felt like I was boring you to death talking about it.
Oh, was that the reason?
I needed an outlet to talk about it that wasn't gonna drive you insane. So
Yes.
that's why I started. That's why I started my Twitch channel, was just to play and talk about Pokemon.
So your Twitch channel is a result of preserving our relationship,
Yeah.
essentially.
Not that you ever got sick of me talking about Pokemon, but I
That's,
suspected it might be there, and I was
that's
like, I better play this safe and find a new outlet, because I'll go into talking about like the Pokemon's design and being like, I love this design because look, the way it's, you can really see how this Pokemon has evolved to be the way it is. And I'll just talk about, like I said, the morphology, just like kind of like with Horizon Zero Dawn. I'll look at all that. And the nice thing about what I loved, especially because Pokemon's been going so long, it's been great to see how they've evolved it and changed it. Like with Scarlet and Violet, they finally brought out the first proper open world. Obviously, Sword and Shield had a bit of open world, and Legends of Arceus. Oh my god, that's such a good game. I love it. It's the best one they've done. I thought it was amazing. Actually, one of the things I talk about on my Twitch stream is how much there's bits in Legends of Arceus that is just like real animal research. The
right.
fact that you have to go and catch the same Pokemon over and over and over and over and over and over and over again, like to actually complete like your studies of it, is like, yep, that's it. And also the way in Legends of Arceus, like they do it is like, so in the poke in like in each Pokemon game, there's always like a kind of bird at the beginning, like Pidgey or Starly, something that's like just a beginner Pokemon for you to catch.
Yep.
And once you've caught it in the normal games, you've caught it, and that's kind of it. You don't do anything more with it. But in Legends of Arceus, they actually had it so that if you wanted to complete your Pokedex on Starly, you had to catch it loads of times. You had to sneak up on it. They made it hard to catch, even though it was just this simple Pokemon. And I just thought that was like brilliant. It was a brilliant kind of re-look at the world. The fact that the Pokemon attacked you on sight, or like a lot of them did, I thought was really good. Like, because it showed
Yep.
that actually Pokemon can be these quite dangerous creatures. You
Yep.
know, um, and it kind of really kind of looked at them more as part of the ecosystem, animals that were part of the ecosystem. So Legends of Arceus in particular, I adore, but I love all the new ones. I play them pretty much. I pretty much get them. If I've got the console to play it on, I get them the day it comes out.
Yeah, you do. Yeah, I think one thing about Legends of Arceus, having watched you, oh, I watched your stream actually, to support you, and because it's interesting. The There's always going to be, as a game series matures and its audience grow up, there's always going to be analysis into things like the world building and the ethics of the world they're inhabiting, and a lot of series don't stand up to that kind of analysis. Like Harry Potter doesn't. Like, as soon as you do time travel and stuff, it messes it up. But the Pokemon community are like, just like, yeah, we're not making, it's not dogfighting, it's not cockfighting, it's something else. What
Yeah,
Arceus does is really, for me, bridges that tenuous storytelling gap. It doesn't matter. It's a game, right? It doesn't matter that it doesn't quite work. That's part of the joy of games, is you get to experience these things that wouldn't work in real life. If it was realistic, it would be boring. But Legends of Arceus goes quite a way to establishing canon behaviors in Pokemon. They're not animals, and they live in this world where the fact that they attack each other on sight means that attacking each other on sight is part of their nature. Now, perhaps the first people to capture Pokemon were actually pacifying them and allowing them to fight, because they don't die, they just faint, right? Allowing them to faint and then grow stronger. Perhaps that was the only way they grew, right? They needed to fight in the same way that humans need to work out and study. Pokemon need to fight in order to develop and grow. That's their nature. So it's a tenuous ethical justification for capturing animals and making them fight, but it does still. It shows that the company, Game Freak, and Nintendo, and the community of developers and the development team and the players all care enough about this to make space for a game that changes the structure and goes some way to explaining and justifying um, the the uh, the barbarism, in order to allow
yeah,
you to continue playing and feel good about it. And I
yeah,
think that when a game series or a book series or a TV series gets that mature, it either eats itself alive, like Harry Potter has done, more or less. Like, the community and the author really are not getting on particularly well, or it grows and it shifts and it changes. And for all the criticism that the new Pokemons get for not being that technically uh, with it, especially Scarlet and Violet, with a lot of the memes that have come out of the glitches and all of that. That's right. Um, the fact that they are open to trying new things and they're open to changing up the structure um, means that the series is going to have longevity, because it can't be allowed to go stale. People won't tolerate just the same thing over and over again. They think they will, but eventually they'll get bored if it doesn't change. And each game changes stuff just a little bit, just a tiny little way. And I think that's what keeps players like you interested, because you're excited to see what's coming next.
Very much so. I always used to tell people who said, "But it's about animals fighting each other," because they're not fighting to the death. It's like a wrestling match. That's what I used to say to you. I said, "It's like a wrestling match." I said,
Like a
"They're not."
wrestling match where they shoot bolts of lightning at each other to the point where they.
These are fantasy creatures, so it doesn't matter. That's what I used to say, anyway. But in reality, I'm like, well, it's just a game. Fine.
Well, exactly, isn't it? And that's the thing, is like with a lot of I was listening to an audiobook today, and it is Lightbringer by Pierce Brown that I'm near the end of, and there was a typo, in it. It was a glaring typo, and not only was it a typo, but the reader, what's his name, Tim Gerard Reynolds, absolutely fantastic audiobook reader. He read straight through the typo. It was the word heat instead of heart, which completely changed the name. There's this like special gauntlet that's being used for stuff, and it's called the Heart Stealer, I think it is. I think Heart Grabber. I don't remember what it's called. It's this really dramatic name, but it was typoed as heat instead of heart, and he read it as heat stealer, and I was just like, "Whoop," and it stayed in there. But you do have to kind of just relax, and like, okay, it was a typo. They missed it. It's a constructed story made by people who make mistakes, and it's the same with games. All these teams are putting so much work in to try and get these games shipped, to try and please an audience, to try and make enough money to keep going, make the profit, make the shareholders, all that stuff, all this kind of difficult capitalist structure that exists behind games. And we're so lucky that even with all of that going on, we are being given these beautiful, enriching, engaging and interesting experiences that manage to be works of art, even in and around that structure. I'm not surprised you picked Pokemon at all.
No, that was the only one that could go for the "why don't you just marry it then?"
So Silver and Gold was your first one that you loved?
Yeah, I mean, I liked Red and Blue and Yellow, but I could only play that one at like a friend's house, I think.
Okay, yeah.
And then
Pokemon Red, I spent the money for my bus pass. You buy a termly bus pass. It was like 60 quid or whatever. When I was 17, when Pokemon Red came out, I spent the money that I had in my pocket for my bus pass for the term on Pokemon. And then I was like, said to my mum, I was like, "Oh, I don't know where that bus pass has gone." Obviously, my mother knew I just spent the money on something else. She's not an idiot, but I was just like, "Oh yeah," and I had this new game, and I don't know how the hell I got away with that actually. But Pokemon Red was my first one, and then my friend Anthony had Pokemon Blue, and we used to trade them.
Yeah, so I think it's so. Once again, my cousin just gave me his Game Boy Color.
Yeah.
And Pokemon Gold. So like, although I'd played the other ones, I hadn't been able to sit down and play it religiously, in the way all kids want to.
Mm-hmm.
So like, that's why Gold. I preferred Silver because I loved Lugia, but Gold was what I happened to have. So and I can remember my mum bought me Pokemon Crystal for birthday or Christmas, one or the other.
Yeah.
And I found where she'd hidden it, and I would sneak. She had a really big wardrobe, and I would sneak into the wardrobe. And I took it out of the box and started playing it early.
Oh my gosh!
And
you wild child.
Yeah, and so when I got it for Christmas or whatever it was, I opened it and was like, "Yay, cool!" And then didn't pay a huge amount of attention to it. And my mum was just like, "You've been wanting that game for ages. What's going on?" And she figured it out from that.
Oh no!
my inability as a child to accurately predict and act the correct way was my downfall, and I obviously got in trouble. Um, but I mean, but to be fair, I think my sneakiness proved how happy I was and how much I wanted that game. So there we go.
Well, yeah, and you wouldn't be the first kid in history to sneakily get a glimpse of their,
Yes.
excuse me, of
So
their Christmas present. Although, yeah, actually going in and playing it, like that is
oh yeah,
another level of
I did.
deviance.
I was desperate for that game. Yeah, Crystal was great. Also, Crystal was the first one we got to play as a girl.
Oh, is it? Okay, I didn't know that
Which a lot
actually.
of people, which a lot of male gamers probably didn't think much of, but for me, that was huge. I
Yeah,
finally felt recognised, and you know what? Pokemon was probably one of the earliest games to do that. Like, there wasn't many games back then that did have that option. I mean, there weren't a huge amount of games where you could choose your kind of character that
your
you played
gender
as.
and
So,
stuff.
like
Yeah,
for them, creating a female sprite wasn't a huge thing. But the fact that they considered that really early on meant a lot to me. And probably meant a lot to a lot of other female gamers and male gamers. Probably there were boys who noticed that and liked it as well.
yeah, and there's going to be probably somebody who might mention Samus from Metroid, but Samus from Metroid is like in a big robot suit. You can't tell that that's a woman
Yeah.
very
I mean,
easily.
there have been female characters all throughout history. There's like Samus, there's Lara Croft, of course. But the fact that we can name pretty much all of them on one or maybe two hands
Exactly. Yeah, yeah,
is,
yeah.
is kind of the thing. But anyway, my point was is like that. But choosing who you play as, because of course in Pokemon you're just this little sprite. It doesn't matter. Like so in that game in Crystal when you could choose what your sprite was, that was great for people of all genders.
Yeah, I think that's a really positive step, and I didn't know that actually that was the first one to do it in the Pokemon series. My relationship with Pokemon is very, as a lot of parents my age probably have as well. Pokemon for me was the thing that I latched onto with my eldest son to get him presents for and to ask him about, like, because as a parent it's such a, as I was a weekend dad when my son was very young, and so I'd pick him up on the weekend. I'd travel down from London and I'd go get him, and then we'd spend the weekend down here in the southwest. And you know, talking to your young child is very much all about them and what they're interested in, what they want to do, and what they want to eat, where they want to go, and all that kind of stuff. So just knowing a little bit about Pokemon, having played one of them, we would just be walking up the hill and be like, "Oh, what's your favourite Pokemon? Where are you on Pokemon at the moment?" And it just opened up. I was able to step into his world so easily that he was then able to talk about the things that concerned him and interested him, because he didn't have studies and stuff yet. He didn't have, his friendships were at primary school, which if you're in America or whatever, it's like elementary school. So he didn't have that sort of complex life that he now has, that we now talk about. His life was in these video games, and so I would talk to him about, like, where are you stuck on? Are you stuck on a gym? Are you stuck in a dungeon? Are you trying to get through this area? Are you trying to catch this? Have you tried this method? And it enabled me to just meet him halfway in a world that he loved. And I think that's another wonderful thing about video games as well, is that it really spans the generations.
Yes, my mum knows Pokemon well from having to watch it with me and play it with
Oh
me. She
yeah.
has it. She does have a favourite Pokemon that she still remembers, and her favourite Pokemon is Bellsprout. She
Oh,
thought it was
of
funny.
course. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Your favourite Pokemon is Lugia, is that right?
Oh man, my favourite Pokemon. It's like asking my favourite animal. I know too much about them to fully choose, but I do have Lugia tattooed on my back, so
Yeah.
that's quite a thing. I mean, also love Charizard because I love dragons, and he's a pretty good dragon. He's a pretty good example of a dragon. So, and I'm quite fond of Gyarados as well.
Uh,
And then of course Vaporeon, which of course those three are all. I'm not a Gen Oneer for anyone listening.
oh right, okay. Is that a thing?
Which
Is
a
it?
Gen Oneer is someone who is just like, "Whoa, everything from since Generation One is crap."
Right, okay.
That's not true. Other generations have been wonderful, but they are a lot of my favourites are in the first generation. But there's others in other generations that I like as well, like Lugia from Generation Two. It's
uh,
great. I like Suicune in Generation Two as well.
oh, okay. I do not. I'm not familiar with all of those ones, but I'm sure that various people will be. My favourite is Umbreon.
Yeah, that's
He's
Generation Two.
he's like a little moon cat dog with cool circles. They're like cat dogs, aren't they? The Eevee evolutions.
EVs, there's a big debate as to what they are.
Yeah, they're
Some
like.
people are insist. Some people insist they're cats. Some people insist they're dogs. Some people insist they're foxes. They're little creatures.
Oh yeah, they're like definitely have like a Vulpine quality to them, don't they? Like foxes.
Yeah, pretty foxy. And then Espeon's obviously kind of a bit more catty. But...
Definitely. Well, what a lovely note to bring the podcast to a close. I'm not surprised you went for Pokemon, and I'm quite pleased that we got a chance to discuss that one on here on the first run. Um, Okay, well, I haven't like worked out a proper ending or anything, so I'm just going to say to anyone. Well, first of all, no, I'm going to address you. Thank you so much for being my first guest. If
Thank you. It's been really exciting being your first one. I loved it.
if people liked what you had to say and would like to seek you out on acceptable forms of social media, like your Twitch channel or whatever, how can they find you?
Well, my Twitch channel, I haven't posted a lot regularly, but my Twitch channel is Evelfa, which is EVELFA, and you'll find me on there. My Instagram, I talk about I've got my own coaching business, which I talk a lot about on there, but I do still talk about like gaming and stuff, and that's just my name, which is Samantha de Mattos. Which I'm sure when you post this video up, you can just link
I'll
to.
put some links in the description,
Yeah,
yeah,
that's
and
probably the best place for me.
it'll be my first time uploading a podcast as well, so I'll try and navigate that and see how that all
Figure it
works.
out.
Put it in. I'm sure there's a description field in them. Okay, well, to everyone who is either watching or listening or has downloaded, and I guess you wouldn't be here if you weren't watching or listening. Thank you so much for participating in this first episode with me. We will find another guest for the next one. I think we've got a few ideas on who those people are going to be. And if you would like to come find me, I have a YouTube channel. It is probably attached to this podcast actually, because I'm going to put it on YouTube Music. But my name on there is Puck, which is actually part of my real name. My real name's Adam. And you can find me on there by typing in Puckatron. So it's PUCKATR0N, because the one with the O was somehow taken. And then I have various other things as well. But if you find the videos, you'll find everything else. I think we're just going to wrap it up there.
Yeah.
And reflect on the ending and maybe come up with something a bit more scripted, eh? All right. Well,
Good. Great for a first one, I think.
thank you so much. Let's bring it to a close and let's go get some lunch, eh?
Wicked. All right. Bye.
Bye.